Hello.
Hey, Amy, what's going on?
Not much. How are you, Joe?
Everything's good. Nice to meet you. Where are you located?
Currently, I'm in Edinburgh, UK for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So I travel around the world as a digital nomad. This is just a stop on the journey.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Yeah, that's probably a dream for a lot of people is to be able to have that latitude. So that's pretty cool. How do you stay grounded doing that? Is it just you're so used to it, your compass is ready to go?
Yeah, so it's basically been 4 years of trial and error of trying to figure out, okay, what do I need in a place to figure out where the gym is and where the closest bookstore is or coffee
Yeah.
shop or, all of the kind of trappings of home wherever I go. And so it really helps that I'm able to kind of know what I need to feel kind of in a routine while also being really flexible with what routine looks like.
Okay. So let's get into it. And my first question is going to have a lot to do with you traveling and with what's been going on. 4 years ago, you were trying to figure out this pandemic. How long is it going to last? How is it going to affect us? How did you get through it with the amount of travel that you do and with what you do with your life? How did you get through it? How did it change you?
Yeah, so going into the pandemic, I was working in Hollywood. I was a TV writer, and all of the writers' rooms shut down and turned into Zoom rooms. And so I was trapped in Los Angeles with all of my other friends as the pandemic was going. And then I also was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. So I'm like, am I trapped here? Am I just going to be stuck here? I'm worried about this pandemic. But then I looked around at my friends and I was like, I don't think it's going to be good for us mental health wise to just stay in our small little apartments in Los Angeles. We should go since Airbnbs are really cheap around the country right now, let's quarantine around the country in beautiful places in nature, in Colorado, in Nashville, in Washington. And that's what we did. And so that kind of kicked off my working remotely journey. And so I started traveling with a group of friends and started doing a lot of work for different people because I also ghostwrite memoirs. And when I left Hollywood, I really kind of leaned into that. And so that kicked off the digital nomad journey. And I just kept on going from there because I loved it so much. And then also through the journey of traveling, I ended up healing my autoimmune condition by spending a lot of time in Europe, which is has great quality produce, which changed a lot. And then I also published two books. So getting out into the world really changed the trajectory of my life in a number of different ways.
So what about your autoimmune issue? Was that kind of resolved with having a better mental health and moving around and all of that? Did that get resolved?
Yeah, so I'm completely in remission now, thanks
Wow.
to, I think, in part being able to travel. Europe has incredible quality produce. And so when I eat bread and cheese in the US, I just like it just makes me feel really, really bad. And then when I'm traveling, I can be, I was eating a ton of like pizza in Italy to the States, my doctor's like, what did you do? Your blood tests look amazing. And I'm like, I just ate like pizza like for a month. And he's like, keep doing that. And I took that advice to heart. And so I think that when we think about travel, everyone thinks about the stress that it takes on your body. And everybody thinks about like, oh, you're running around, there's so much going on, like you're in airports, like flights are getting delayed. But in terms of life as a digital nomad, the way that I approach it kind of as a slow mad, spending a month or longer in different places. You're just living in different parts of the world and learning different parts about culture. And it was really cool to spend a month in Kyoto, Japan earlier this year, where I was able to really dig into my yoga practice and spend a lot of time in nature and go on hikes. And so being able to be out in the world ended up being the best thing for my mental health, my creativity, and my productivity.
I mean, that has to be the best natural remedy in the world. I mean, I love travel and I love what it does. And it just because you realize that the world is a massive place and there's all these things going on, billions of things every day. And when you get pigeonholed, like you said, being in LA during a pandemic, and LA was hardcore during the pandemic. I mean, I still can't believe they were closing beaches down. That just is weird to me, you know. But
Yeah.
but to be able to get out. I remember one time I'm a visual artist as well, and annually where I lived, I would always have my artwork out, and I would just take donations, and people would grab artwork. And I remember a guy came up to me. It was one of the more magnanimous moments that I ever had doing it. And he came up to me and he was telling me about someone that he knew that got over cancer, and it was a lot about just really changing up a lot of the ways that they live their lives. It was a lifestyle change, and they really did get over it. It's that whole mind over matter thing, getting to a place in your life where your brain can take over the biology of what could potentially happen. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and there's so much research around trying to figure out how to get your nervous system into a better state, the benefits of mindfulness. And a lot of the countries that I visited over the last few years have been very nature forward, have been a more kind of balanced approach to work and life, and less stressful. And so I think that being in these different places have helped me kind of pull different practices from different cultures to help heal. And I think that that's something everybody who travels gains something different. And I think that there's so much to be learned health wise from other cultures around the world too.
You know, in my 20s, I traveled a lot into Europe, and on 9/11, I'm an IT technician by day, so I stopped by a classroom and looked at all of these newspapers of historical events that happened, and one of them was 9/11. And I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, Italy, the morning that happened, and a guy's shooting his hands up, and he's going, Nuevo York. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I landed in Paris on September 4th, and historically, when I traveled, I just didn't go contact home. I was off. I was like cut off. But obviously, a magnanimous event happened, so I was trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember a couple days after that, I went to Cinque Terre, which is the poor man's Riviera, and I went to Vernazza, and I was like, of all the places on the planet to be, I remember like laying in the Baltic Ocean, just floating and just looking up, thinking of all of the things that were happening in the world. That's probably the best, most ideal place to be at, and it's that idea that, other parts of the world are going to take, it's just traveling is just such a good thing because being in America at that point was hardcore. All they were doing was showing it over and over again. You were just reliving and swimming through, people fighting at the gas pumps. But there was just everybody was walking around with their dogs, going to the market, doing things. And it wasn't like they weren't cognizant that something major happened. It was just on a different part of the world, and they didn't know what the skirmish was between America and these forces that were taking towers down. So it was very interesting to be in that place.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of difficult because like when you travel, it's like trying to strike that balance of getting away from where you come from and from your problems while also knowing that some of your problems are on the next flight over too. And so
Yep.
it's like trying to get the distance from the things that are going wrong and things that are happening to then be able to like reapproach them. So when you do return to the States, like you're able to approach it in a way where you're not letting the panic overcome you or letting the your problems kind of like come over you. And I feel that way when I return from the States from like traveling abroad. Like everywhere has its problems, but when you're kind of away from your home country, you can kind of be in a little bit of a vacuum.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. So at the end of the day, if I put you in front of a bunch of third grade students for career day, and one of the kids was curious and says, Hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
Yeah, I'm a writer of stories for myself and other people. And I think that that has been such a gift to be able to do the work that I do. So I kind of have two lanes that I work in. So I'm a memoir ghostwriter. So I work with CEOs and Olympians and really inspiring people all over the world. And I help them tell their story in book form. And that has been such a gratifying experience because I was recently in Singapore working with one of my clients. I met up with one of my clients in Athens. Like I have clients all over the world that I get to meet up with through my travels. And so being able to step into their lives and help them tell their stories and be able to lend my skills has been just such a really satisfying experience. And I think there's a little bit of a negative tinge people have around ghostwriters because they're like, oh, but you don't have any credit for it. I'm like, it's not my story. I'm the vehicle and like the craftsman for somebody else's story, just like if you're a home builder building somebody's house, it's not your home, but you're helping to build something that will last for generations for them. And so it's been such a privilege to be this ghostwriter, kind of be this vehicle for other people's stories. And that has also been able to inform my own work as a fiction author. I recently came out with my new book, The Nomad Detective, Volume 1, which is inspired by all of my travels as a digital nomad and kind of takes this mystery genre lens on what it's like to be a traveler in the world and interacting with all these different people with these different agendas, and the problems that they face. And so being a memoir ghostwriter has allowed me to not only have access to the intimate lives of really fascinating people, but also kind of help me understand human nature better when I'm writing about it in fiction that is also kind of inspired by my travels.
It's weird, the literature cops with all of these rules they put out, like with ghostwriting. And even like the other day I was reading and they were like, Hillary never wrote her memoir. She just did diction. And it's like, and then people say, well, if you're listening to books and you're not reading it, is it really? It's like, come on. I mean, how sanitized do we need to make the swimming pool before it's too sanitized to even swim in? I mean, it's like we're all ingesting it. For me personally, thank God for Audible books because I don't have time to sit down and read, and I'm a really slow reader. but when I get that audiobook going at like 1.25, I'm swallowing books and I'm still getting it. And and there's just certain people like there's certain people that have to watch things happen in front of them or read a book. I can listen to like a sporting event and I absorb it in a very different way. And it's just like, I don't know. It's just like with ghostwriting, like you're delving into these worlds and helping people transmit their stories that are going to affect millions of people. And that's totally valorous. It's like that needs to happen.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people don't realize that writing and publishing a book is such a team sport. If you're going at in terms of the self-publishing route or the traditional publishing route, no matter what you pick, you have a team of editors and proofreaders. And if you're going traditional publishing, you have a book agent and then the publishing house. And if you're doing self-publishing, you have beta readers and you have your friends and family around you. And so even if you are physically writing the book yourself, you still have so many other hands on the book to help you get it out there. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They kind of have this like image in their mind of like a writer with a typewriter just like agonizing over their story when it's like, no, like fiction authors and nonfiction authors rely so heavily on a team to help shape the book and get it out there. And I think that that's something that like I wish people understood because like with the ghostwriting component of it, clients like sit down with me and we have all these interviews and then I ask them questions and then even after the calls they send me their voice memos, I read their diaries. It's their book and their voice and the way that it's being put down on paper is just a little different than if they were to write it themselves. And I think that everyone should be leaning into their strengths as a reader or a listener or a writer and understand that like the different form doesn't matter as long as it serves the same function of being able to spread great stories and help people understand more about you and what you've been through and to therefore kind of inspire them to live life more fully.
And as you very well know, coming from LA and Hollywood, that's the irony of Hollywood is that it transmits all of these stories to us that are fascinating, but it also kind of waters down the idea of what you do to publish. They simplify and they create this kind of mystic realm that doesn't exist because there's an enormous amount from start to finish that goes into actually putting it in pulp.
Yeah, and I think that it's also interesting to kind of see like the revolution of publishing happening right now. And a lot of writers are getting on this platform called Substack and starting to be able to publish more directly to their readers and finding new ways of publishing books through doing serialized kind of chapters, similar to the way that authors used to publish their books through Pulp Fiction and dime store novels, like one episode at a time, one chapter at a time. And so we're kind of seeing a return of that, but with paid newsletter platforms like Substack, where their readers can sign up and support an author for a certain amount of money each month, and that allows the author to continue putting out fiction or nonfiction or essays. And I think that stuff like that is so fascinating because publishing is already starting to be kind of diverted and there's also the stigma of self-publishing is starting to go away when you realize that if you pick up a book from Amazon, you don't necessarily know if it's self-published or not, if it's high enough quality. And I think that that's really cool because there's so many horror stories I've heard of people who've gone through traditional publishing only to have control of their book wrenched from them and to be, swimming in all of this, like this kind of like heartache that goes with traditional publishing sometimes. And also the process takes really long. So I think it's really interesting to see this shift in publishing. And as a self-published author, I think it's really empowering because I've seen self-published authors kind of take the stage in a new way. And I think that we're about to see a huge disruption in a way that makes it more equitable and also allows writers to write for their readers rather than having to deal with this in-between third
Yeah.
party that wants to have control over their image.
And we've seen that with the music industry. There's so many profits that are made by these publishing houses. A lot like Prince before he died took his entire catalog and re-recorded it because he wanted control. And it should. The artists should have control over it. But that can open up a whole other thing with the pirating of music and all of that, the digitizing of it. But I'm curious, when you were in the third grade, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream?
I wanted to be a writer.
There you go.
So I'm
I had a
living my
feeling.
dream.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the first book that you read that really opened the curtains that made you either want to write or want to read more?
Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I think it's such a great book. It feels like it kind of balances this level of sci-fi and morality and what's right and wrong, but it also features young characters in a way that doesn't feel like it is looking down on the young characters. And I think that when you're a kid and you're growing up and you're reading all these like YA books or children's books, you get a sense that the characters are kind of being a little bit infantile, written in a way that sometimes feels infantilizing and sometimes feels like these characters aren't very smart. They're making dumb choices. They're going down to the scary basement with a flashlight, knowing there's a monster down there, and they're not doing anything. Whereas Ender's Game felt like a very like intellectualized version of like approaching these kids' stories and like having them be at the center of like an intergalactic war. And it didn't feel silly. It didn't feel like I was being talked down to as a young reader. And I think that that was like the first book that I felt like, oh, this book is for me in a way that I hadn't felt before. And as a reader, as I've continued moving along my career and picked up different books, I've realized that some books just aren't for me, and that's okay. And I will never be the person who's going to covet reading War and Peace. I'm just not. I'm
Yep.
going to want to read the thrillers. I'm going to want to read the books that people are like, oh, that book is too popular. And I'm like, no, it's popular for a reason. It works. And I think that like understanding that our taste are simply the things that are for us and not to be shamed by anybody for that, because I think there's a lot of shaming that goes in the book world where, you know, even that New York Times like top 100 books of the century list that came out that everybody was up in arms with because it was very highly intellectualized, like establishment, like New York Timesy books, not the books that were popular or that people really loved. And so I think that there's kind of this like divide in the literary world between what critics love and what people love.
That is so well said because I remember when I was younger, I used to suffer through books, and now I don't. Like if it's not, I'm not jiving with it, I'm out. I'm going to the next one. So that's really interesting. So I'm curious, what was the first story you wrote where you got a really good visceral experience from somebody that really was like, wow, I got it. This makes sense. This is my destiny.
Yeah, it was something in the fourth or fifth grade where I wrote a kid's story called The Adventure Girls versus the Digital Boys, and it was like a feuding like treehouse like spy story. And it was just like a small story that I wrote, but I my teacher was like, you should do more of this, and so I did. And so when I got to high school, I started doing National Novel Writing Month every November for 7 years, and I really dedicated myself to the craft, and that's also what helped me get into USC for undergrad for screenwriting and helped kind of launch my career as a professional writer and get me out into the world and doing things. And I think that it's a real challenge to hold on to the dream of being a fiction writer specifically, because even when I was coming up and writing novels, I was swayed into the world of Hollywood because people were like, it's the golden age of TV. It's like novels, but in TV. And I'm like, I love TV, don't love movies, but I can give this a try. And I felt like while I enjoyed my experience like writing for TV and being in Hollywood, I was like still kind of pulled back to the world of novels. And I'm like, they can't make any money. That's impossible. And I'm being proven wrong. And I'm seeing other people who are self-publishing and making an amazing living off of it and starting to grow my own book sales. And so it's kind of cool to be moving into this kind of realm where every time I'm like, oh, freelance writers don't make money. And then I prove myself wrong with that. And I think that that's kind of the inspiring thing, that if you really want to do something, you'll continue to prove yourself wrong throughout the process if you stick with it and are smart and strategic about it.
Take me back to where you were born and raised, and what were these seeds that ultimately became your career as a writer, going to Hollywood and becoming a digital nomad? What was really harvested in you to evolve into who you are today?
Yeah, so I grew up in this like small suburb north of Phoenix where people rode horses to work. And then there was also like the white picket fence side of the suburb too. So it was like kind of like middle of nowhere desert, and then a bunch of Starbucks. And I felt so trapped in this like barren desert of nothingness, as a lot of people who grew up in the suburbs felt. And I helped my parents run their vintage bookstore. So they ran like an online vintage bookstore where they sold pulp fiction, detective novels, and I just found myself loving reading these detective novels and loving the thriller genre. And so when I was growing up, my mom was a writer. My parents really encouraged me to write, and so that helped me. And also, you know, shipping these books out every week to different people, and I think that that really kind of kickstarted my love of writing. And then I started making films with my friends, and so I kind of knew very early on that I loved this thing, and I was very obsessive with it. And I just knew that if I stuck with it, then I'd figure out a way to make it work as a job. And making writing your job is a very challenging thing to do, and it requires like a lot of different pieces of strategy and thoughtfulness and personal branding and entrepreneurship knowledge. And I think that that's something that I didn't take lightly, and I kind of went really far into that side too to understand like how can I make my writing my business as well as an art form.
So, who's been a hero for you, an inspiration?
I think it's tough. Like I think that heroes is a strong word.
Yeah.
I think that nobody should truly be your hero because when you meet them, you'll be disappointed by them. And I've seen that in Hollywood as somebody who has met some people that I would have maybe called heroes at one point, but I'm like, oh, I don't know about that anymore. I think really my parents were a huge support of like my fiction writing and my partner Kyle. And I think that they felt like real life heroes to me because they were staying true in terms of like what they thought, like what they saw in me, and then my partner Kyle staying true and like what he is passionate about and what he wants to do. And I think that having that ability to see people in my life that were staying true to their core beliefs of who they are and what they're best at, and also encouraging that in me, like I think we all need people like that in our lives.
So if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, actually, let me back up a little bit. Being in Hollywood, and I always find this fascinating with people that have been in DC in the political realm. There's all these characters and figures that we see on TV, but we don't know who they really are. Who was the person when you were in Hollywood, when you were in LA, that you really gravitated towards, look forward to running into? They were really cool, just like a really good human being.
Actually, my partner Kyle. I met him in Hollywood and we ended up starting businesses together before we started dating. And because I gravitate towards people in Hollywood that were really, the up and comers, because I felt like when I looked at a lot of the people who were at the top and the showrunners and the producers and the actors, they were very unhappy. And so when I was looking for those role models or the people that were excited about life, I was looking to my peers. And I started like kind of creating from the ground up. I started doing open mic nights and hosting different events with the creatives in Los Angeles because I found more inspiration from my peers and the people around me that were bravely doing their art rather than the people who were making millions of dollars and seemed just miserable doing it.
I interviewed Josh Mallerman, the writer of Bird Box. I've interviewed him a few times. And we were talking about the premiere, and Sandra Bullock was in the room and everybody was in the room. And this is one of the more memorable quotes I've ever gotten from anybody that's been in that world. And he was like, he was really nervous, really, really nervous. And he said the way that he calmed himself down was he was like, I'm a freak like everybody else in here. All of us creatives have this like part of us that are just totally like we're different. And once he really wrapped his head around that, he totally calmed down. And I think there's a part of that where we get mystified by the lights and all of this other stuff. But at the core of it, the ones that are really good are doing it because they're artists and they're doing it for the right reasons, you know? So, um, so of all of these travels that you've had, and all these places you've been to, what's been one of the most magical places that you was unexpectedly magical? You didn't expect it.
Yeah. So in most of my life, I haven't been a big hiker. But then when the opportunity to do the Inca Trail, which is a 4 day, 26-mile hike to Machu Picchu came up, I was like, I'm going to do this. And my friends were very surprised. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, let's go camping and go kind of trek this like incredible trek in Peru. And so when we showed up to this 4 day trek, I kind of was like, what did I just get myself into? Because I'd done training and I had wore my hiking boots on the treadmill to break them in and done all of that stuff. But I think nothing really prepared me for how ancient and how challenging that trail is because the amount of mysteries on that trail and the amount of like when you're up in that high altitude, everything feels a little fuzzy. It kind of created this mystical experience when like this like the fog would roll in and you're walking through this cloud forest or you're just making this like, insane trek up Dead Woman's Pass, and you just see this mountain range where it looks like this woman is like sleeping and the wind is going crazy. And we were caught in a rainstorm one day and like almost slipped off the mountain, and there was like lightning right near us. And it was a challenging trek that I had never in my whole life did anything near that difficult. But what made it really interesting and what actually kind of inspired one of the stories kind of in my book the Nomad Detective, and what kind of caused me to come up with this idea of like what would happen if there was a murder on the Inca Trail was this idea of all of this kind of like these mysteries in Peru and in Cusco and on the trail where our tour guide would just like point at like a bunch of boulders or this wall and being like, those boulders are too heavy for humans to carry. Probably aliens brought them because that's our best guess. Historians have no idea. And so to have these really kind of like these locals and these historians, these people around us being like, these mysteries are older than man. Nobody really remembers who was the first person to live and discover Machu Picchu. The people that, showed up were just like, there were people before us, but we don't know who they are, or this was just here. And so to kind of be in this place with all of this folklore and all this mythology and all these ghost stories, and to be trekking and sleeping in the wilderness while all of those stories are kind of swirling in my head, it was something that I was like, this has got to be a murder mystery. And so it just like was a really magical moment.
That's a writer's paradise right there. So at the end of the day, of everything that you've done and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
I think I think the thing that I'm most proud of is this debut collection of short stories for the Nomad Detective, because I think as it's kind of my first work of fiction outside of Hollywood and outside of the scripted podcasts I've done. And so this book is my basically the distillation of all of these travel stories where I ask the question, what if being a digital nomad and a traveler and an expat out in the world, what if everything is going wrong and like who is solving the crimes that is going on in these communities, and like there must be a private eye, a detective who's going in and solving these things. And so that's kind of what spurred the collection, and it took a long time to kind of get the book to really be where it needed to be. And so after kind of like spending this almost this entire year coming up with the idea and drilling down and like going through my travel memories and also doing deeper research in different true crime cases to get inspiration, I think what I've put together is something that I feel like not only feels like kind of like a globe-trotting mystery, but also a deeper kind of like exploration of what it means to be searching for something outside of your home country and looking for something that you're missing.
Okay, Amy, so everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, everyone you know, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a writer who is also has been looking for something, and I embarked on these travels to find solutions and to find answers and to also find more of myself out in the world. And I think I found a lot of that. And I think that I'm grateful to have been tested by my travels and by the things that I've faced out in the world. And I think that it's just such a privilege to be able to learn from the people I've met along my journey and to be able to kind of share that in the form of stories, both for the work that I do for my memoir clients as well as in my book.
So if anyone wants to pick up the book, anyone wants to reach out, learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business, where do they go?
Yeah, they can go to my website, amysuto.com, and that's Suto is my last name. They can also find me on all of the social media channels at Suto Science, so my last name, Suto, and then the word science, or they can go to Amazon and type in The Nomad Detective Volume 1.
Excellent. Amy, this has been wonderful. What a great story, you know? Keep etching it. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe.
Thank you. Take care.